Miss Ashcombe cried off, the plaintiff's counsel said, and let the words settle over the assembly room like dust off a shaken carpet. She gave her word before God and her neighbors. She accepted the addresses of a gentleman of standing. And then, when a colder calculation suited her, she withdrew it. My client asks only what the law allows a jilted man: damages, restitution, and that the county be told plainly which of them broke faith. Honoria Ashcombe did not weep. She sat very straight on the hard chair they had set apart from the rest, a little island of dove-gray wool in a sea of better coats, and she folded her hands in her lap so that no one should see the one that wanted to shake. The assembly room at Nethercombe was full to its dingy corners. Half the market town had come to watch the Ashcombe girl answer for herself, and the other half had come to be seen watching. She knew every face. She had curtsied to most of them once, in the years when curtsies were still owed to her. You will observe, the counsel went on, warming to the pleasure of a captive room, that the lady does not so much as color. There is composure, gentlemen, and there is a want of feeling. I leave you to decide which you are looking at. A ripple of approval went round the benches. Honoria kept her eyes on the middle distance, on the tall gray window where the March light came in weak and honest, and she thought, quite clearly, that she had been coloring for 2 years now, only inward, only where no one could charge her for it. At the long table below the magistrate's chair sat the man who had done this to her. Crispin Vane wore mourning dark blue and an expression of gentle injury, as though it were he who had been left standing at a cold altar. He did not look at her. He had not looked at her once since the proceedings opened, and she understood the strategy of it. A man who has been wronged need not meet the eye of the woman who wronged him. It was very well done. Everything Crispin did was very well done. "Have you counsel, Miss Ashcombe?" the magistrate asked, not unkindly. He was a fat, tired man named Thornberry, who plainly wished himself at his dinner. "I have not the means for counsel, sir," she said. Her voice was low, but it carried, she had learned, in the long house at Wexley, to make a small voice reach the far end of a cold room. "I mean to answer for myself. That is unwise. A great many wise things are beyond my means just now, sir," someone laughed, and was hushed. Crispin's counsel, a florid gentleman named Paget, smiled the smile of a man watching a fish walk willingly toward the net. It was then that the stranger at the back of the room stood up. He had come in late and taken the meanest seat, by the door where the draught was, and no one had marked him particularly. A spare, dark-coated man of perhaps 33, with a barrister's plain bands at his throat and a leather case under his arm. He might have been any provincial man of law come up on the assize road. When he rose, the room turned to him, as a room turns to any new thing, and he inclined his head to the magistrate with the ease of someone who had stood in 100 such rooms. "If it please the bench," he said, "my name is Mr. Ellery. I am engaged in the matter of the settlement between these parties. I would ask the court's indulgence to observe, and in time, to be heard." "Engaged by whom?" said Paget sharply. "By the interests of justice, sir, which are the only client a man in my position may claim without shame." The magistrate waved a heavy hand. "Sit, sit. We will hear you when there is something to hear. This is a preliminary matter." Mr. Ellery sat, but before he did, his eyes crossed the room and rested, for the space of a breath, on Honoria Ashcombe, not on her gray dress, not on her ruined name, but on her hands, where they lay folded over a thin bundle of papers she had brought and had not dared produce. Then he looked away, and she told herself she had imagined the whole of it. She did not know that she had just been looked at by the Duke of Ravenscar. She would not know it for 3 weeks. That is the part of the story she could not see, and you can, that the plain man of law by the draughty door was no man of law at all, but one of the greatest peers in the north of England, come south in a hired coat to settle a matter that touched him nearer than anyone in that room could guess. They called her the Jilt of Nethercombe now, and the name had followed her home like a dog that will not be driven off. Wexley Grange stood a mile out of the town on the road, to nowhere in particular. A square, honest house that had been handsome in her grandfather's day and was now merely proud. Honoria walked the mile in the failing light because no carriage could be sent for her and no money spared to hire one, and she was glad of the walk. It let her put her face in order before her father should see it. Sir Edmund Ashcombe was in his bookroom when she came in, which was where he was always to be found now, among the county histories and the ledgers he could no longer bear to open. He had been a magistrate himself once. He had been a man the neighborhood came to for judgment. Now he sat by a small fire with a rug over his knees and asked her, before she had got her bonnet off, the question she had walked a mile to answer well. "How did it go, my dear?" "It went as we expected, Papa. It was set over for a fortnight." Mr. Paget spoke a great deal. I said very little. "You should have taken Havelock's man. Havelock's man wants 11 guineas to lose the case slowly," she said, and made herself smile when I can lose it myself for nothing at all. He did not smile back. He had grown very thin across the 2 years since the trouble began, and thinner still since the suit was laid, and she watched the guilt of it move across his face as weather moves across a field. It was his fortune that had done this, or the want of it. When Crispin Vane had offered for her, 3 summers gone, Sir Edmund had settled upon the marriage the greater part of what remained to the Ashcombes, £4,000, advanced early into Crispin's keeping, so that the young couple might set up their household without waiting on the old man's death. It had been done for love. It had been done because a father with little left to give wished to give it while he lived to see the joy of it. And then Crispin had found a Miss Ferrand in Bath with £11,000 and a chin like a hatchet, and the addresses that had been so warm cooled to nothing in the space of a season. And the money her father had given did not come home. He kept the money, Sir Edmund said now, as he said most evenings, staring at the fire. He kept the money, and he sued us for the crime of it. There is a cleverness in that, Honoria, that I have not the stomach to admire. There is, she agreed quietly. Do not admire it then, have your supper. She did not sleep that night, and it was in the smallest hours, sitting up in her cold room with a single candle, that she took out the thin bundle of papers she had carried to the assembly room and had not dared show. They were letters. His letters, Crispin's, written in the 2 years of their engagement, when he had been all a lover ought to be. She had kept every one. A woman of small fortune keeps what she is given, and he had given her, in those years, a great many pretty words on good paper. She read them now not for tenderness, of which there was none left in her, but as a prisoner reads the walls of a cell, looking for the crack. For there was a thing in the letters that Crispin, in the cleverness of his suit, appeared to have forgotten. She turned the candle up a little, and read, and did not blow it out until the gray came up in the window, and the birds began their unbothered business in the yew. Mr. Ellery came to Wexley Grange 3 days later. He came in a hired gig with a hired boy to hold the horse, and he sent in a plain card, and Honoria received him in the morning room, because it was the one room with a fire lit, and because a woman branded a jilt no longer troubles over much about whether she should receive a man of law alone. Her reputation was already spent. There was a strange freedom in having nothing left to guard Miss Ashcombe. He bowed and set his leather case on the table between them, and she saw that his coat, though plain, was very well cut, and that his boots, though muddied, were the boots of a man who did not usually walk. She marked these things and thought nothing of them. Grief makes an observer of a woman, and then robs her of the wit to use what she observes. Mr. Ellery, you said in the assembly room that you were engaged in the matter of my ruin. I confess I did not know my ruin required so much engaging. It seemed to me to be going along very smoothly on its own. The corner of his mouth moved and was governed. You have a dry way of speaking, Miss Ashcombe. It is the only luxury left me, sir. I economize everywhere but there. Then I will be plain in return, for I think you will prefer it. Mr. Vane's suit against you is not what it appears. He does not bring it to be revenged upon a woman who slighted him. He brings it because he is in debt to the ears, and a judgment against you, damages awarded, your family named as the party in breach, allows him to keep the sum your father advanced, and to say to his other creditors that the money is contested, held against a claim, not to be touched. Your ruin, Miss Ashcombe, is a curtain. He has hung it in front of a great deal that he does not wish looked at. She was silent a moment. It was one thing to know a wound in one's own dark bedroom. It was another to hear a stranger name it in daylight. You are very well informed, for a man engaged by justice. Justice keeps good accounts. And what is your interest in it? A man does not ride the assize road for the pleasure of another woman's rescue. Here he paused, and she saw him choose his words with a care that she would understand only much later. My interest, he said, is that Mr. Vane's debts have lately been bought up and pressed, and that some of the tenantry he means to squeeze to pay them are not his to squeeze. He reaches, in his difficulties, into places he has no right to reach. When a man like that is stopped, a good many people who never heard his name sleep the easier. You are not the only one he has hung a curtain in front of. You are merely the one standing nearest the window. It was not the whole truth, but it was true, and she heard the truth in it. And something in her that had been braced for pity and ready to refuse it found instead a thing she could work beside. Not rescue. Alliance. She had not been offered an alliance in 2 years. Then tell me what you would have me do, sir, she said. And I will tell you whether I can afford it. He came to Wexley 3 more times in the following days, always in the hired gig, always with the leather case, and Honoria learned the shape of the work in something, without meaning to, of the man. He wished to see the accounts, what her father had settled, when, and on whose word. He wished to see the correspondence between the 2 families in the years of the engagement. He wished, above all, to understand exactly what had passed on the day Crispin claimed she had cried off, for the entire suit turned upon a single afternoon and a single supposed refusal, and if that afternoon could be shown to be a lie, the curtain came down, and everything behind it with it. They worked at the long table in the book-room while Sir Edmund dozed by the fire, and Honoria, going through the household ledgers she had kept since her mother died, was aware of Mr. Ellery watching not the figures, but the keeper of them, the neat columns, the small economies, the way she had made a starving house look fed on paper so that the servants who stayed for love should not know how near the bone they lived. You keep a very exact book, Miss Ashcombe. There is little enough in it. One counts what one has when one has little of it. It is the rich who need not add up. My mother said something of the kind. Once, he turned a page. She kept the house books herself, to the scandal of everyone, and she said a great estate is only a small one that has stopped paying attention. Your mother sounds a sensible woman. She was thought eccentric. It is the same thing in a woman with money. He ran a finger down a column and stopped it. You have here a charge for coals in November, and none after. It is a cold house for a winter with no coals in it. We burned wood after November. There is a copse at the bottom of the meadow that is ours, or was, and I have the 2 men who stayed cut what falls. One does not enter a purchase in a ledger for a thing one has not paid money for. The warmth is real, the line for it is not. So the book understates the comfort of the house. The book understates a great deal. It is a very discreet book. It knows, for instance, that the mutton on a Sunday is a smaller joint than it was, and it does not say so where my father might read it and grieve. A ledger, Mr. Ellery, is the most tactful servant in a poor house. It keeps the accounts, and it keeps the secrets, and it never once looks at you with pity. He said nothing for a little while. You might have let the men go. 2 servants unpaid for love are a charity a starving house can ill afford. I might have. I did not. She turned a page of her own. When my mother was dying, she asked me one thing, which was that I should not send old Pruitt away, because he had carried me on his shoulders when I was small, and there was nowhere in the world for a man his age to go. I have kept that promise at the cost of a good many joints of mutton, and I do not regret the mutton. One keeps one's promises, sir, especially the ones no court will make you keep. Those are the only ones that signify. Is that your rule? It is the whole of my religion, she said. I have found it cheaper than most, and truer than any. Honoria almost smiled, and caught it, and put it away. She had made a rule with herself, in the assembly room, that she would not be charmed. Charm had cost her a fortune, and her name. But there was no charm in this man exactly. There was only attention, which is a rarer thing, and she found she had grown so unused to being attended to that she scarcely knew how to meet it. Once, going through the letters of the engagement, he came upon one in Crispin's hand and read it, and set it down with a care that was almost distaste. He wrote you a great many fine things. He did. Fine writing was always cheaper for him than fine conduct. You do not keep them for sentiment, then. I keep them, she said, because I am poor, and because a woman with nothing learns to throw away nothing. I did not know, when I kept them, that they would be of use. I only knew they were mine, and that he could not have them back. He looked at her for a moment across the letters, and there was something in his face she could not read, and did not try to. She had given up reading faces for profit. No, he said at last, he cannot have them back. The fortnight was nearly spent when the second blow fell, and it fell, as all Crispin's blows did, from a direction Honoria had not thought to guard. The magistrate's clerk brought word to Wexley that Mr. Vane had entered a new deposition. A witness had come forward, one Barnaby Skell, formerly a groom in the Ashcombe stables, dismissed 2 years since for helping himself to the corn money, who was prepared to swear on oath that he had carried a note, in Miss Ashcombe's own hand, to Mr. Vane's lodgings on the very afternoon of the supposed refusal, and that the note had said, plainly, that the lady wished to be released from her engagement. There was a note. It was produced. It was in a hand very like her own. It is a forgery, Honoria said, when Mr. Ellery came out to her white with the news, or as near white as such a controlled man came. I never wrote it. I never sent Skell anywhere, but off the premises. He was turned away for a thief, and now he is bought for a liar. Mr. Ellery, I know you did not. He said it flatly, and the certainty of it steadied her more than any comfort could have done. That is not the difficulty. The difficulty is that a forged note and a sworn man are worth a great deal in that room. And truth spoken by a ruined woman is worth very little. Skell will swear. The note looks like your hand, and a magistrate at his dinner will call it proven and be glad to go home. Then we are beaten. We are not beaten. We are late. It is a different thing. He set his case down on the hall table and opened it, and she saw him hurried, which she had never once seen him. Miss Ashcombe, I must ask you something, and I must ask you to think before you answer it, because a great deal turns upon it, and I will not have you say what you wish were true instead of what is. The afternoon Skell swears he carried this note. Where were you? She thought. She made herself think, past the noise of her own fright, back into a day 2 years gone. It was a Thursday, she said slowly. The 11th of the month. I know it was the 11th, because it was the day my mother's stone was set, at last, in the church, and I had gone to see it done. I was in the churchyard the whole of that afternoon with the mason, and with old Mr. Fenwick, the sexton, and afterward I sat by the grave until the light went. I was not within 2 miles of Crispin's lodgings. I was burying my mother a second time. Her voice did not break, but it went very quiet. There were people who saw me. The mason, Fenwick, the curate came out to me at the end and walked me to the gate because I would not go in out of the cold. Mr. Ellery was very still. Then he took a small book from his case and wrote in it, and she saw his hand was quite steady after all. A mason, he said, a sexton, a curate, and a dated stone standing in a church that has a register of when its work is done. He closed the book. Miss Ashcombe, Mr. Vane has made the same mistake clever men always make. He has forged a lie and forgotten to ask where the truth was standing that afternoon. He has put you at his lodgings, and God, as it happens, has put you in a churchyard with 3 sober witnesses and a piece of carved stone that cannot be bribed. For the first time she could readily remember, Honoria felt something rise in her that was not endurance. It was not hope, quite. It was the cold, clean anger of a person who has been lied about and has just found the ground under her feet. Then let us go to church, she said. He did not tell her, in all this, who he was, and you, who have known since the first hour, may wonder that a man could sit at a woman's cold table so many evenings and let her think him a hired lawyer. But consider what he had to weigh. He had come south not for her at all at the first. He had come because Crispin Vane's bought-up debts led, when he followed them, straight into his own country and his own people, a tenant family on the edge of the Ravenscar lands, whom Vane had a mind to turn out on a technicality, to raise ready money. The Duke of Ravenscar was a man who did not turn out families, and who did not care to be near any man who would, and he had gone quietly to look into the matter in the plain way he preferred, without the noise a duke makes when he travels as himself. But somewhere in the looking into, in the papers of the case, he had come upon a copied line from a letter. A line the lawyers had marked as immaterial, written by the woman the whole county was calling a jilt. It was one sentence. It was about her mother's death. It said a true thing so plainly, and with so little wish to be admired for saying it, that he had read it 3 times, and then gone to sit at the back of an assembly room to see the face of the person who had written it. He had meant to see her once and go home. He was still telling himself that, on the 4th evening at Wexley, when Honoria Ashcombe made a dry joke about her own poverty, and did not know she had made his week turn on its hinge. A duke may go anywhere and be flattered. He had not, in a great while, been simply spoken to by a woman who wanted nothing from him because she did not know there was anything to want. That was the thing he could not buy, and it was the thing she gave without knowing, and it undid him more thoroughly than any beauty could have done. So he said nothing of his name. He told himself he withheld it for her sake, that a duke's open interest would ruin what little was left of her, would make of her rescue a scandal, and of her defense a spectacle. And that was true. But it was not the whole reason, and he knew it was not. And the not knowing whether she would look at him differently if she knew was the one uncertainty a duke is never taught to bear. He would have to tell her. He knew he would have to tell her. He only meant to win her case first, and let the debt be all on his side, so that whatever she chose after, she would choose it as a free woman and not as a rescued one. The Church of St. Anne stood at the edge of Nethercombe, and it was there, on a raw grey morning, that Mr. Ellery made his quiet preparations while the town readied itself for the second act of the Ashcombe girl's disgrace. He took the depositions of the mason and the sexton and the curate himself, with a clerk to write them fair, and he did it plainly, and paid the men for their day, and asked them to be present at the assembly room. He had the parish register brought out, and the entry for the setting of the Ashcombe stone marked and witnessed. He wrote, that week, 3 letters of his own, and where he sent them and by what fast post he did not tell Honoria, but a rider went north from Nethercombe, on a horse that cost more than the town supposed a hired lawyer could command, and came back within the week with a sealed packet that Mr. Ellery put into his leather case, and did not open in her presence. "You are very secret, sir," she said on the last evening before the hearing. "I am careful. It is a duller word for the same habit. You have done a great deal for a woman you had never met." "I have done very little," he said, "and most of it late." He was looking at the fire, not at her. "Miss Ashcombe, whatever comes tomorrow, I would have you promise me one thing. I can afford very few promises. This one costs nothing. When you are asked tomorrow to speak, and you will be asked, and it will be made to seem the moment of your ruin, I would have you say nothing but the truth, plainly, and then be silent, and let the evidence do the rest. Do not defend yourself with speeches. A speech can be doubted. A dated stone cannot. Will you leave it to the papers to speak? And hold your tongue?" She considered him. "You are asking me to sit quiet while I am called a liar to my face. I am asking you to trust that the room will turn, and that when it turns, it must find you dignified and not shrill, or the turning will do you no good. I know it is a great deal to ask of a person who has been holding her tongue for 2 years. It is," she said, "but I have grown very good at it." She was quiet a moment, and then, because she was tired, and because he had been kind, and because there was no one else in the world to say it to, she said, "Why does it matter to you how I am seen? You will have won your case whether I am shrill or silent. Your tenants will be safe. Mr. Vane will be stopped. What is it to you whether the town thinks well of me at the end?" He did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, still to the fire, "Because I have read one sentence you wrote, Miss Ashcombe, and I would not have such a sentence come from a woman the world was permitted to despise. That is all. It is enough." She did not understand it. She thought it a strange, lawyerly kindness, and she went up to her cold room and slept. That night, after a long fortnight of lying awake, without the candle. The assembly room at Nethercombe had never been so full as it was on the morning of the second hearing. Word had gone about that the Ashcombe suit was to be settled that day, that there was a witness who would swear that Jilt had confessed her jilting in her own hand, and the town came out as it comes out for a hanging, soberly dressed, quietly excited, ashamed of itself, and there all the same. Crispin Vane sat below the magistrate in his morning blue, and beside him now sat a heavy, ruddy man Honoria recognized with a lurch as Barnaby Skell, scrubbed and stuffed into a decent coat, turning his hat in his hands with the industry of a man being paid by the hour to look honest. Paget rose and unfolded the note, and read it aloud in a voice built for the reading aloud of ruinous things. "Sir, I can no longer in conscience hold you to an engagement my heart has outgrown. Consider yourself released. I remain, with all good wishes, H. Ashcombe." He let it hang. "This, gentleman, in the lady's own hand, carried to my client's very door on the afternoon of the 11th by the man who sits before you. The Jilt of Nethercombe, it seems, was courteous enough to put her cruelty in writing. My client asks only that the court read what he read, and judge as any of us would judge." He passed the note up to the bench. Thornbury looked at it, and looked at Honoria, and his tired face was no longer kind. "Miss Ashcombe, is this your hand?" The room leaned in. This was the moment. She could feel the whole freight of the town's appetite settle on her shoulders, waiting for her to weep, or rage, or crumble, or confess. She thought of a plain man at a cold table, asking her to hold her tongue and trust the room to turn. "It is not my hand, sir," she said. "It is a good copy of my hand. I never wrote those words, and I never sent that man anywhere but off my father's land for stealing. On the afternoon of the 11th, I was in the churchyard of St. Anne, setting my mother's stone, from noon until dark, and there are 3 men here who saw me do it." She folded her hands. "That is all I have to say." And then she was silent, as she had promised, and the silence was the hardest thing she had ever done, harder than the walk home in the dark, harder than the folded hands. She sat in it while Paget smiled his fisherman's smile, and Thornbury sighed and reached for his gavel, and she thought, for one plunging moment, that trust had been a fool's economy after all. Then Mr. Ellery stood up. "If it please the bench," he said, "I ask leave to be heard now. I said, at the first, that I would be heard in time. The time is come." He did not raise his voice. That was the thing the town remembered afterward, that the man who unmade Crispin Vane never once raised his voice, but only laid things upon the table, one after another, in the flat, unhurried manner of a person reading out a bill. "I hold here," he said, "the deposition of Josiah Marl, mason of this town, sworn and witnessed, that upon the 11th day of that month he set the memorial stone of the late Lady Ashcombe in the churchyard of St. Anne, in the presence of Miss Honoria Ashcombe, who remained there from before 1 o'clock until the light failed." He laid it down. "I hold the deposition of Thomas Fenwick, sexton of the same parish, to the same effect." He said it upon the first. "I hold the deposition of the Reverend Mr. Aldous, curate, who states that he walked Miss Ashcombe to the churchyard gate at dusk on that day, because she was chilled with sitting, and that they spoke together of her mother a full mile from any road that leads to Mr. Vane's lodgings." He laid it down. "And I hold the parish register of St. Anne, in which the setting of that stone is entered, dated and signed, by a clerk who had never heard the name Vane, and had no reason on earth to lie for anyone." He let the papers lie there, a small white drift of them, and the room made a sound it had not made before. A long, low turning, like a tide changing under a pier. Miss Ashcombe cannot have carried a note to Nethercombe Lodgings on an afternoon she spent burying her mother 2 miles the other way. The note is a forgery. The man who swears he carried it is a thief this house dismissed for theft, and I will show, before I am done, whose money is presently in his pocket. But I have not finished, and I would ask the bench's patience. For there is a graver forgery in this room than a groom's copied hand, and it is the whole of the suit itself. This is irregular, Paget said, on his feet now, his color high. This person's standing has never been established, it will be, said Mr. Ellery. Presently, sit down, sir. You will not like it standing. He turned then to the leather case, and took from it the thin bundle Honoria knew, for they were her letters, the ones she had read by candle in the smallest hours, the ones she had given into his keeping, without quite knowing why she trusted him with them. The charge against Miss Ashcombe, he said, is breach of promise, that she gave her word to marry Mr. Vane, and withdrew it, and that the injury and the cost are therefore hers to bear. I will not argue it. I will read it, out of Mr. Vane's own hand, for he was, as the lady has observed, a great writer of letters. And he read. He read a letter Crispin had written in the second summer of the engagement, unfolding it without hurry, and his flat, unhurried voice filled the room where his shouting never could have. My dear Honoria, he read, your father's goodness has quite overwhelmed me. That he should advance the whole of the settlement now into my keeping, rather than wait upon a colder season, is a mark of trust I shall spend my life deserving. £4,000 is a great charge, and I hold it as I hold your heart, in stewardship, against the day it is wholly ours." He lowered the page. The money was advanced. It was received. The gentleman acknowledges both, over his own signature, and calls it his life's work to deserve it. Where, then, is that money now? No one answered. Crispin Vane had gone the color of the March window. "I can tell you where it is," said Mr. Ellery. "It is spent, and pledged, and spent again, and there are men in Bath and in London holding paper on it, who would be very glad to know it is being held out of their reach behind a lawsuit against a country girl. But read on." He was, as I say, a great writer of letters. He unfolded a second, and a third, and the room was so silent now that the crackle of the good paper was a sound in it. He read Crispin's own hand, renewing his promise in the autumn. "I count the months until I may call you wife," after the date on which the suit swore she had already cried off. He read Crispin's own hand, in the winter, complaining prettily that her replies had grown cool, wondering aloud whether her heart had changed, begging her not to release him, begging her, in writing, months after the day he now swore she had jilted him, not to let him go. "You will observe," said Mr. Ellery, and now something like a blade came into his quiet voice, "that a man does not beg to be kept by a woman who has already thrown him over. He does not, in December, plead with a lady not to release him from a promise she made, on his own account, in July. Unless, of course, the July jilting never happened at all, unless it was invented, 2 years after, when a richer marriage and a mountain of debt made it convenient to have been the wronged party rather than the wrong one. The promise, gentlemen, was not broken by Miss Ashcombe. It was broken by Mr. Vane, who cooled toward her the moment a larger fortune presented itself, kept the money her father had entrusted to him, and then, finding himself pressed by creditors and wishing above all things to appear the injured man, sued the woman he had robbed for the crime of having been robbed. Paget tried, then, to stem it. He objected to the standing of the letters. He objected to the standing of Mr. Ellery. He demanded, red-faced, to know by what authority a hired lawyer read a gentleman's private correspondence into an open court and called a man of Mr. Vane's standing a thief. And Mr. Ellery set down the last letter, and reached into the leather case a final time, and took out the sealed packet that had come south on the fast horse, and broke it open before them all. "By this authority," he said. He laid the papers on the table beside Crispin's letters, a banker's receipt, dated and sealed, for the whole settlement, paid over by Sir Edmund Ashcombe, into an account in the name of Crispin Vane, and beneath it a second document, and it was this one that the magistrate took up and read twice, and the reading of which changed his tired face entirely. "You will have wondered who engaged me," said Mr. Ellery to the room, since it was plainly not this lady, who had not 11 guineas for a country attorney, and plainly not her father, who has scarcely 11 guineas at all. I told the bench, at the first, that I was engaged by the interests of justice. That was a lawyer's evasion, and I asked the lady's pardon for it above all others in this room. He turned, and at last, after the long weeks of the whole affair, he looked at Honoria Ashcombe openly, before every soul in Nethercombe, and he said, "My name is not Ellery. I am Ravenscar. Mr. Vane's debts were bought up, some weeks ago, on my instruction. When it came to my knowledge that he meant to raise money by turning families off land under my protection. In pursuing that, I came upon this suit, and this lady's name, and one line of a letter she had written that no schemer on earth could have counterfeited, because it was true, and truth in a woman's hand has a particular sound that fraud cannot manage. I came to see who had written it. I stayed to see her lied about. And I hold Mr. Vane's debts, gentlemen, which means I hold Mr. Vane, and I tell you plainly that every penny of it will come home to Wexley Grange before I sleep, or the whole weight of what he owes will come down on him within the week." Barnaby Skell was already edging for the door. Somebody had the wit to shut it. "The witness," said Mr. Ellery, without turning, "was paid 3 guineas and the promise of a place. I have the man who paid him, and the day, and the sum from Mr. Vane's own steward, who preferred an honest account to sharing his master's ruin. Sit down, Mr. Skell. Your afternoon of usefulness is over." It did not take long after that. Ruin, when it comes for a clever man, comes very fast, because a clever man has made so many enemies who have only been waiting for him to slip. The magistrate dismissed the suit against Honoria Ashcombe with a coldness toward the plaintiff that the town would talk of for a year. He ordered the settlement restored in full. He bound Barnaby Skell over for perjury, and he sat looking a long moment at Crispin Vane, who had come into that room the wronged and gentle victim of a heartless jilt, and would leave it as something the county had a great many uglier words for, and he said only, "You have wasted this court's morning, sir, and worse. Get out of my sight." Honoria did not watch Crispin go. She had thought, in the 2 years of imagining this hour, that she would want to watch him go, that there would be some sweetness in it. There was none. There was only a great tiredness, and under the tiredness, slowly, like feeling coming back into a limb that has been sat upon too long, the strange knowledge that it was over, and that she had not, in the end, had to become cruel to survive it. The room was breaking up around her into 100 conversations. The same faces that had come to watch her ruin were arranging themselves, already, into people who had always thought there was something not quite right about that vain fellow. She let it wash past her. She was looking at the man who had called himself Ellery, who was gathering the letters back into their bundle with the same care he had handled everything of hers, and who she now understood she had never known at all. She rose and went to him, and the town watched that too. "You might have told me," she said. They had come out, the two of them, into the raw gray yard behind the assembly room, where the town's appetite could not quite reach them, and the March wind came clean off the fields. He had her letters in his hand still. He offered them to her, and she took them, and neither of them spoke of the money, which had been the smallest thing in the room, and was the smallest thing between them now. "I might have," he agreed. "I have asked myself these 3 weeks whether I ought. I decided not, and I am not certain I was right. Why not? Because I did not wish you to be grateful." He said it simply, without a duke's practiced charm, and she saw that the plainness of him at her cold table had not been a disguise at all, or not entirely, that the man of law and the duke were more nearly the same man than either of them had supposed. "A great many people are grateful to me, Miss Ashcombe. It is the dullest thing in the world, being thanked. I did not want to add you to the number who cannot look at me for the debt of it. I wanted—" He stopped. He was not, she saw, a man to whom the naming of what he wanted came easily. "I wanted to know whether you would speak to me the same way once you knew what I was. That is a vain thing to want, and a coward's way of finding it out, and I ask your pardon for it. But there it is." She looked at him for a long moment. The wind pulled at the gray wool of her dress, the dress she had worn to be ruined in, and now wore, unaccountably, to something else. "And if I speak to you exactly the same," she said, "how are you to know it is because I do not care that you are a duke, and not because I am too proud to seem to?" The corner of his mouth moved, and this time he let it. "I cannot know. That is the difficulty with anything worth knowing. One is obliged to take it on trust." "You are a great lord," she said, "and you might have any woman in 3 counties who would be glad of the asking. You do not need a jilt with a mended dress, and a father who cannot pay for coals. You gain nothing by me. There is no fortune, no name worth the having, no advantage on this earth. Only a poor house and a dry tongue. I should like that understood plainly. Before either of us says another word we cannot unsay. I know precisely what I gain, he answered, and I have known it since a Thursday, at your cold table. It is you, Miss Ashcombe, that I want, and not one thing that comes with you, for the plain reason that nothing comes with you at all, which is how I am sure of the wanting. A man cannot mistake his heart for his greed, when there is nothing whatever to be greedy for. You asked me to take a great deal on trust yesterday. I did. It turned out well. It did, she said. And then, because she was tired of economy, because she had held her tongue for 2 years and did not see why she should hold it now that the holding was over, I will tell you the truth then, since you have made truth so much the fashion, this morning. I do not care that you are a duke. I find it, if anything, an inconvenience. I had grown used to a man of law I could speak to plainly across a cold table, and now I am to be shy of a peer. I liked Mr. Ellery very well. I do not yet know Ravenscar, but I think, if he is the same man who read my household ledgers as though they were interesting, and did not once, in 3 weeks, offer me his pity, I think I should like to. He did not kneel in the yard. He was not a man for gestures where anyone might see, and neither, she was glad to learn, was she. He took her hand, gloved, in his, and held it a moment, and that was all. And it was enough for a raw morning, behind an assembly room with the whole town at the windows. But before they went in, she said the things she had been turning over since the letters went one by one upon the table. You said there was one line I had written, one sentence, that brought you south. I have wondered which, he told her. It was a line from a letter she had written, in the first winter of her ruin, to no one of the letters she wrote and did not send, because there was no longer anyone to send them to, and which somehow, in the copying and gathering of the case papers, had found its way in among the rest. She had written it the night her mother's stone was ordered, when the money to order it had been all but the last money in the house. The line was this: I find I do not mind being poor half so much as I mind being thought to have deserved it. I read that, Ravenscar said, and I thought, whoever wrote that has been lied about, and knows it, and has decided to go on being honest anyway, which is the most expensive thing a person can decide. I wanted to see the face of someone who would spend that much and think it a bargain. That was all. I have told you it was one line. It was. Honoria Ashcombe stood in the cold yard with her letters in her hand and her mother's stone standing true in the churchyard, a mile off, and she found that she was, for no reason she could name to the satisfaction of a court, no longer poor in the way that had frightened her. They were married that autumn, quietly, at St. Anne, with the mason and the sexton and the curate among the guests, and old Mr. Fenwick weeping without the least shame in the second pew. Sir Edmund Ashcombe walked his daughter up the short aisle on legs that had steadied wonderfully once the settlement came home and the ledgers could be opened again without dread. He gave her away, and then sat down, and was, for the first time in 3 years, simply a father at a wedding, with nothing on his mind but the pleasure of it. Wexley Grange did not become a great house. It became, which is better and rarer, a home, its fires lit, its servants paid, its cold long tables shortened by half, so that the people who sat at it might hear one another, which had been the first improvement the new Duchess made, and the one she was proudest of. Ravenscar kept his own great estate in the north, but he was often at Wexley, more often than a duke has any business to be, and the town of Nethercombe grew used to the sight of the pair of them walking the mile of the nowhere road on fine evenings, talking, always talking, as though they had 2 years of plain conversation to make up, and meant to do it. It was more than a year later, on a raw gray morning much like the one that had unmade Crispin vain, that Honoria stood at the window of the morning room with a child in her arms, a small, solemn, dark-haired scrap, not 3 months old, with, everyone agreed, exactly his father's eyes, a particular storm gray that had frightened a great deal of England, and now looked up at his mother from a wrapping of white wool, with no notion of frightening anyone. Crispin Vane's ruin had run its course by then, quietly and completely, as the ruin of a man to whom money is owed by every quarter always runs. The richer marriage had come to nothing when the lady's father looked more closely into his prospects. The debts had come down, all at once, as debts do when the man who holds them stops being patient. He had gone abroad, it was said, to somewhere the letters could not follow, and there was a kind of justice in that a man who had lived by fine letters should end where none would reach him. Honoria did not think of him often. She found she had almost nothing left to spend on him, and was glad of it. There are people not worth the price of remembering. Her husband came in from the cold with the county paper under his arm and the March damp on his shoulders, and he stood beside her at the window, and neither of them said anything for a while, which was a thing they had learned to do together and prized above most conversation. "You are thinking of that morning," he said at last. "I am. I was thinking that I sat in that room quite sure I was about to be ruined, and holding my tongue because a strange lawyer asked me to, and that it was the best economy I ever made in my life." She shifted the child against her shoulder. "I was thinking that you never did say, that day in the yard, the thing I half expected you to say." "Which thing?" "You know which. Everyone had it that the great Duke of Ravenscar had rescued the poor Jilt of Nethercombe from ruin, and I waited, I confess, to be told how much I had been rescued. You never told me." He was quiet a moment, looking out at the honest gray light on the honest gray road. "There was nothing to rescue you from that you had not already survived," he said. "You had kept your father's house on nothing, and your own name whole when the whole county was pulling at it, and you had decided to go on being honest at a cost most people will not pay. I did not rescue that. I could not have. A man cannot give a woman the one thing she already owns." He put out one finger, and the small dark-haired scrap closed a fist round it with the ferocity of the very young. "I did not choose you because you were poor and I could mend it. There was nothing left of the fortune to mend, the money was the least of it, and always was. I chose you because of one true sentence, and I have gone on choosing you every ordinary morning since, which is the only way I know that the choosing was real. That is what I did not say in the yard. I say it now. I chose you. I would do it again in a colder room than that one." Honoria Ashcombe, Honoria, Duchess of Ravenscar, though she still forgot it as often as not, stood at the window of the house that was a home now, with her husband's finger caught in her son's fist and her mother's stone standing true a mile off in the parish ground of St. Anne, and she did not answer him in words. There are answers a court could not credit, and a room could not turn upon, and this was one of them. She only leaned her head against his shoulder, in the raw gray light, with nowhere in the world she was obliged to be, and let the morning go by. If you have sat with this story to its quiet end, then perhaps you know already what it cost her to hold her tongue in that cold room and trust the letters to speak, and perhaps you have your own 2 years of being thought to have deserved something you did not. If this hour by the fire was a comfort to you, stay a while longer with us, and subscribe so the next story finds you. And tell us, before you go, would you have held your tongue in that assembly room and trusted the evidence to turn the room, or would you have risen and spoken in your own defense, and hang the cost of it